Great things are rarely done alone. A special thank you to our 200th anniversary sponsors, Air Canada, Canadian Tire, Clearwater Seafoods, Lord Nelson Hotel and Suites, Michelin North America Canada Incorporated, Scotiabank, CBC, the Chronicle Herald, and the Globe and Mail. We are proud to recognize our ongoing partnerships. Thank you for your generous support.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dalhousie University and to our Belong Forum with Rick Hansen. My name is Ivan Joseph. I'm the new Vice Provost of Students here at Dalhousie University. I'm still counting my time in days, so if I get a name wrong, please excuse me. I'm loving my new role. I'm loving the East Coast and Halifax community, so thank you for having me. This is my third Belong Forum that I've been a part of, and I can tell you that I've loved every single one of them. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. They challenge you, they push you, they cause you to ask some interesting questions, and they spark some conversations in the debate. That's what they're supposed to do, to help you see where you belong. Let's begin. Please join me in welcoming Elder Jerry Musqua LeBlanc of Nakawa Nation to provide an opening blessing. Thank you, Elder Jerry. This evening, we will award Rick Hansen, an athlete, activist, and philanthropist, an honorary doctorate from Dalhousie University. We will also hear his thoughts on the question, what will it take for us to create a world where we all feel like we truly belong? Some of you might be old enough to remember when Rick Hansen passed through Nova Scotia as part of his amazing Man in Motion World Tour in the fall of 1986. You'll learn more about that journey and about some of his many other achievements in a few moments. I know he has inspired so many of us here tonight, and we are thrilled to welcome back to our province. I am pleased now to welcome on stage Dalhousie President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Richard Florizon, as well as Dr. Catherine Harmon, Vice Chair of Dalhousie Senate, and our very special guest of honor, Rick Hansen.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Joseph, Elder Jerry. Oh my goodness, Rick, Vice Chairman Catherine. It's just so great to have you all here tonight. We're so pleased that you're all here to join the Dalhousie community for our final Belong Forum of the year and to bestow an honorary degree on the incredible Mr. Rick Hansen. You all know that 2018 is a special year for Dalhousie as we reflect on our university's journey so far and look forward towards our third century. Our 200th year has been filled with all kinds of events, programs, and performances across all of our faculties and campuses in the community, and in fact, even right across the country as part of a coast-to-coast alumni tour that took us right from Vancouver to St. John's, Newfoundland. And the response has been phenomenal. We've had more than 14,000 people at our 200th event so far, and there's still more to come. Go to dal.ca/200 if you want to see the latest events as we conclude the year. You know, from the beginning, over the last 2 centuries, right from our founding in 1818, Dal has aspired both to the highest international academic standards and also to be of relevance and connection to the community. 2 centuries later, we've grown from what was that little college by the sea into a national university and the top research university in Atlantic Canada. But we wouldn't be here today what we are without our people. Our history has been written by our people and enriched by their identities, their cultures, their values, their actions, and of course, their teaching and scholarship. So as we enter our 3rd century at Dal, and in fact, it's been a whole theme of our 200th, our year of belonging, as we enter that 3rd century, we are more committed than ever to creating an environment in which all members of our community, including people with disabilities, feel safe, supported, and respected. In short, where they feel like they truly belong. Our Student Accessibility Center in Halifax and the Student Success Center on our Ag Campus in Truro, our Dalhousie Center of Expertise on Student Access, Inclusion, and Accommodation Support, Able at Dal has an orientation program that is created exclusively for Dal students and their families who identify with a disability and focuses on skills development and learning strategies. But I want to be clear, and it's one of the reasons I'm so pleased to have Dr. Hansen with us here tonight. I want to be clear that there is much more to be done. We know that barriers remain, particularly for those with physical disabilities at Dalhousie. It's one of the reasons that 2 years ago we started to prioritize this and start to set aside a fund to begin to make some accommodations to what is part of the challenge is having a 200-year-old campus where physical accessibility isn't as always as good as it should be. We have a lot of old buildings, many of them sorely inadequate. And so as part of that, with this fund, we've also started, it's underway now, a university-wide accessibility audit that will enable us to identify improvements working with the community, to identify those areas where there are the greatest physical and architectural barriers across the university, and to create a path to implementing the changes. We're also developing out of that then a comprehensive plan for campus accessibility that will conform with the province of Nova Scotia's new Accessibility Act. And this is one of our top priority projects under our equity, diversity, and inclusiveness strategy this year, which we hope to complete over the next 24 months. And that plan, of course, will be informed in part by the audit. It will also outline Dal's long-term strategic direction to improve access across the university, including accessibility in our services, not just physical accessibility, but also employment and education, all crucially important to a comprehensive approach to creating a university and ultimately a society where all belong. Just so you know, a few specific priorities this year. We've got some of our facilities renewal money. They've included recent projects, the creation of a gender-neutral accessible washroom in the Hicks building, which is one of the busiest on campus, as well as accessibility renovations in our human rights and equity services space. And our goal under the Nova Scotia Act, and it's a long-term goal, it aims to ensure that the province is accessible by 2030, which is actually only 12 years away, but there's a lot of physical work to be done. These are critical steps on our path to becoming a better university. And one is, again, that I'd say that tonight's very special guest will help us to draw attention and focus to. All year, these Belong Forum, this series of Belong Forums, has been about asking this important question. What would it take to create a world where all feel like they truly belong? And today, we are so honored that Dr. Rick Hansen will share his wisdom by addressing that very question. I can't wait to hear what he has to say. But first, some formalities to explain why we're wearing our funny hats. Conferring an honorary doctoral degree, as you know, is the highest honor that a university bestows. And so it is now my distinct pleasure to call upon Dr. Catherine Harmon, Vice Chair of Dalhousie Senate, to present the candidate for the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Harmon. Thank you, Catherine.
Good evening. I feel extremely privileged to be part of this ceremony tonight, and I would like to tell you why. In 1980, I joined a student group called Access U of T. So it was a student-led group putting pressure on the administration to make the University of Toronto campuses accessible. And there I met a man who would become my husband, who was also physically disabled. And so for my entire adult life, my worldview has had the lens of accessibility and disability. So you can imagine the excitement when I learned that I would be able to address you and talk about Rick Hansen. A few years after that, Rick's Man in Motion World Tour was coming through Ottawa. So we joined the group that supported the team in Ottawa for the Ottawa visit, helped him get up on Parliament Hill, meet the Prime Minister, and I had the honor to run with Rick on a little segment, and I'll never forget the conversation we had. I've gone on to become a physiotherapy professor and have talked about disability for these 30 years. The last 10 years have been quite interesting because I have been coaching athletes with disability. Fun fact, one of my athletes will be on stage a little bit later, a first-year student from King's College, and we happened to be rowing just the other night together. So one more small thing just to to wrap it up, I did have surgery about a year ago, which temporarily made me quite impaired, and it just reminded me of the challenges of being on this campus when you're not fully able-bodied. So for all of those reasons, I'm excited about being here and sharing the stage with Rick Hansen. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him. He is perhaps best known for his Man in Motion World Tour, the 26-month, 34-country, 40,000-kilometer wheelchair marathon that took him and his team from Vancouver, BC, around the globe and back again. His dream, a world where people with disabilities are not limited by inaccurate perceptions, inaccessible environments, and inadequate research funding. The tour raised an incredible $26 million in the day. That was a huge amount, and was the jumping off point for more than 3 decades of activism for inclusion, awareness, and funding for spinal cord research, sports, and care. Born in 1957 in Port Alberni. We were joking about age, I'm not that far away. Port Alberni, BC, Rick Hansen was injured in an accident in 1973 and paralyzed from the waist down. After rehabilitation, he got involved in wheelchair sports and became an accomplished wheelchair basketball player. When he graduated in 1986, he was the first person with a physical disability to earn a Bachelor of Physical Education from UBC. From the late 70s to the mid-80s, Mr. Hansen won 19 wheelchair marathons, 3 world titles, and 15 medals, 6 at the Paralympic Games, 9 at the Pan Am Games. And he was also named Canada's Disabled Athlete of the Year 3 times. Yeah. Nice. In 1988, after he completed the Man in Motion World Tour, which you'll see and hear a bit more about tonight, I hope, Mr. Hansen founded the Rick Hansen Foundation to continue his work to remove barriers that keep people with disabilities from living life fully. As CEO, he leads the Foundation's many activities, including accessibility programs to identify and address physical barriers in public spaces across Canada, and awareness programs that educate students and the public about the importance of accessibility and the issues facing people with disabilities. The Foundation also supports organizations, programs, and groundbreaking research to improve the lives of people living with spinal cord injuries. Other highlights of Mr. Hansen's career include establishing 5 leadership endowments worth $20 million as part of the Rick Hansen Trust at UBC, the opening of the Rick Hansen Institute and the Bluesen Spinal Cord Injury Center in 2008, the launch of the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification in 2017, which is currently a large focus of what you're working on now, this rating system that evaluates the meaningful access to buildings and provides a certification once it's met a certain standard. The list of awards and honors that Rick Hansen has received is too long here, and I'll just say that this is not his first honorary doctorate. But I would like to mention a few. Queen Elizabeth II Diamond and Golden Jubilee Medals, the Order of British Columbia, and the Lou Marsh Canadian Outstanding Athlete of the Year Award, which he co-won with Wayne Gretzky. He is a companion of the Order of Canada and has been inducted into several Sports Halls of Fame, Canada's BC Sports Hall of Fame, and the Canadian Paralympic Association Hall of Fame. Mr. Hansen has been a torchbearer for at least 5 different elite athletic events, including the 1988 Winter Olympic Games opening ceremonies, and in 2017, he was the ambassador at the Invictus Games. Therefore, in recognition of his vision and action to create a world where all people with disabilities can fully participate in school, in work, and in the community, a world where all people belong, I ask you, Mr. Vice Chancellor, in the name of Senate, to bestow upon Rick Hansen the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa.
So, Catherine, do you want to get the parchment? Wow, what an honor to honor you, sir. It's a pleasure to give these official words. Dr. Hansen, by virtue of the authority vested in me and in Dalhousie University, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities appertaining thereto. Congratulations, Dr. Hansen. Thank you so much. Fantastic. It's incredible what you've done. Amazing. Wow. Thank you. So, oh, do you want a picture? I'll get on this side. So I think we take this now. We'll go back. Yeah.
Congratulations to Dr. Hansen. What a special moment for us all to be a part of it. As Dr. Hansen prepares to take the stage for his Belong Foreman speech, please enjoy a short look back at some of the highlights from his Man in Motion World Tour. Thank you.
Welcome to Mission BC on the banks of the mighty Fraser River. Today, I'm going to catch, tag, and release one of Canada's most impressive creatures. I'm referring, of course, to the man in motion, Mr. Rick Hansen. Hello, Rick. How are you?
Great, Rick. How are you?
Thank you for having me here. What are we doing today?
Well, we're going sturgeon fishing.
This is your passion.
This is it, man.
Fishing for dinosaurs.
Absolutely. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Now, the last time we were together on television, we went bungee jumping. But you wanted to go sturgeon fishing.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I was
and
negotiating.
I said, no, let's go bungee. 3. Rick, how are you?
Hey, I can't feel my legs.
And then I clip it onto the wheelchair like this, clip it on like that.
Is this the kind of thing that you would like to see on every dock?
Yeah, there's no question as we continue to create accessibility for people with disabilities, why shouldn't they continue to boat and be involved in all kinds of great recreational activities? Uh-oh. He's got the control.
Hang on there, I'll figure it out. Oh, geez.
Oh, my God. Rick Mercer, out of control.
Sorry. Never give me that again.
There's just a little sill, there's no step down, so I can wheel straight in here, like this. Just right in, get my feet up here and just swing right up into the seat. And we have ignition. I grew up in Abbotsford, which is on that side of the river, and I ended up going down a creek trying to get bigger trout, and eventually came to the river and thought, oh, there must be really big trout there. And instead, a huge sturgeon jumped in front of me, and I was just blown away by this prehistoric creature. And then eventually I caught a 3-foot sturgeon.
What's the biggest sturgeon you've caught?
The biggest sturgeon that I've ever caught is about 8.5 feet long from the end of the nose to the V in the tail.
Yeah, we won't see something like that today.
You never know.
By the way, back it up. We're just using rod and reel. Is that what we're using?
Yeah, rod, reel, and some really good quality bait.
This is salmon roe.
Salmon roe, and specifically chum salmon roe, because that's what's in the river right now.
Do a gentle cast.
And with control.
And I don't want to go across that line.
That's okay, don't worry about that. Remember the phone?
Oh.
This is what you call, you know, a guy who doesn't listen. Good job.
Nice cast.
When I went fishing with Bob Ray and we didn't catch any fish, we had to take off our clothes and jump in the water.
Well then,
I'm just telling you.
then the first fish that bites, I get it.
Okay. Look. But should I set it?
Yep, hit it.
Set it?
Hit it. Okay, reel down, hit it again. There you go. You got it, buddy. Good job.
Woo! Oh my
Fish on.
God! Fish on!
Nice and smooth. Good job. Looking good.
How much line is out there?
This fish is coming closer now. It's about 10 feet below. There you go. Beautiful. Nice
Look
fish.
at that!
Look at that.
Jeez, he's lively, eh?
Your very first sturgeon.
My very first sturgeon. Hello, little guy. What are these? Like, if I rubbed my hand on this fish, I would cut myself.
Oh, for sure. These are scutes, bony plates that protect the sturgeon from predators. And going up against the grain, they're like razor blades, and they just shred.
So going this way is fine.
Yeah.
But going this way would be like a razor.
So if something was coming up trying to grab it, it would get all cut up and say, oh,
It's
I
like
don't
the
like
Klingon of fish.
that. This is a pit tag.
And what information is in there?
It has an embedded 10-digit unique alphanumeric code.
If someone catches this sturgeon, this tag will tell them the age of the fish, when it was caught last.
In 100 years,
If you want any more information than that, it has to accept your friend request.
like that, and there you go. That fish has now been tagged.
Does the gentleman dress to the left or the right?
110 centimeters. Awesome.
I
That's
literally
beautiful
caught a fish this big. Like when people say, oh, I caught a fish this big, I literally caught a fish this big. Talk to me about the Fraser River Sturgeon Conservation Society.
You know, it's a society.
You actually were one of the founders.
That's right. I was one of the founding members that helped start that organization in response to a major catastrophic event. For 2 years in a row, 93, 94, there was a big die-off of huge mature female fish from 8 to 15 feet long.
So when you're not out there promoting accessibility around the world, you're saving a species.
It's important to me. You know, fishing has been a big part of my life, and you have to put back as much or more than what you take out. Watch, he's gonna jump. Ready? Whoa! There we go. Now I got him.
Do you need my assistance? Do you need any advice? Look at this one. There we go. Nice.
Nice job there, Rick.
We got the number.
Perfect.
All right. I will do this. Okay.
There you
It's gonna be just like the Bourne Identity. You won't remember a thing.
Fish on! Fish on! Reel it in, man. Fish on! Come on, Rick. Whoa! Listen to that line spin.
Oh! That is a big fish going the other way. Do I just let him go?
Yeah, you can't do anything about it. If you really want some fun, we can bring out the water skis.
Come on, Fidgy. Man versus prehistoric beast.
Stay focused.
Maybe this will be an hour-long special.
80% of the fish are lost in the last 20% of the battle.
Really? This can still get away from me now? How far do you think he is?
He's coming in about 2 feet so far.
He's coming 2 feet?
Just kidding.
Here he is.
Oh, that's a nice
Holy,
fish.
look at that. Come along, little sturgeon. Time to measure my monster. Here we go. Come along. Oh no, my arms don't stretch that far. 4.5 feet, just like me.
I always said you hit above your weight, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Great having you.
Cheese.
Growing up, you don't nothing that man can't do if he sets his mind to do it. Anything is possible. I even believe that one day the wheelchair will be something you'll see in a museum.
I can't believe it, Rick. I almost think I'm in a dream or something. This is unbelievable.
Amazing. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm Nova Scotia welcome to our guest of honor, Dr. Rick Hansen.
Thanks, Ivan. Appreciate that. Thanks very much, everyone. It's an honor to be here. It really is. Thank you. Such a privilege. Thank you. Truly is such a privilege. And I want to thank you, Ivan, for that introduction. And, of course, Richard and Catherine for the amazing honor of being bestowed an honorary doctorate degree here in Dalhousie. It's a reflection of the work that has been done by so many to help a young kid who had a goal and a dream to try to deal with setback and adversity and to learn that hope endures and we all have our place in the world and we can make a difference. And we have a responsibility to try to pay it forward. And you know, this university has a tremendous history. This place here in Halifax has a tremendous place in my heart, and it is filled with gratitude. I feel like I am so fortunate to be here in this moment. I could have never imagined being in this place during some of the early moments of my life. You know, they say that character is largely formed in the first 6 years of life, and if that's true, I think I was well on my way because my earliest memories were surrounded by family and friends and always on an adventure. Fishing, hiking, I love sports. I even had these wild dreams that maybe one day I would represent my country at the Olympic Games, just maybe. And then one fateful day, I was on the magnificent adventure of a fishing trip, and with my buddies coming back from that fishing trip, we hitchhiked. And I got in the back of a pickup truck, and the driver, he went around the corner and he lost control. It threw me to the ground against a big steel toolbox, and it broke my back. And I went to a little hospital, and the doctor said, after he x-rayed me, that not only was my back broken, but I was paralyzed, and of course, I would never walk again. So you can imagine how that felt when you're a young kid filled with hope and optimism, and your whole world is in front of you. You think you have it by the tail, the world, and you know where you want to go and how to get there, and then all your hopes and dreams are shattered along with that spine. It was devastating. And I had absolutely no point of reference of how to view my new world. I had no visibility on what it was like to have a disability. As a matter of fact, I inherited all the traditional stereotypes and stigmas that most Canadians in the early 70s had about disability, which was that if you had one, you were usually in trouble, that you probably wouldn't amount to much, you didn't have much potential, and often there was association of a tremendous amount of pity. And for me, that translated to self-pity. And so it was a big, dark canvas, not filled with much hope, definitely not with any color of possibilities and hopes and dreams. And so I had to start from ground zero. And probably the most difficult times were when I was laying in that hospital in a bed, and it seemed like an eternity was ticking by as the summer unfolded, in the heart and in the dreams of a 15-year-old. So I was able to at least set a goal that maybe I would sit up for the first time for my 16th birthday on August 26th after being in the hospital for 2 months. And they took me out of a horizontal bed into a wind-up bed where I could sit up. And it's interesting, a few years ago, one of my roommates who took this photo celebrating my 16th birthday, sitting up for the first time, he was cleaning his basement, and he came across the photo, and he dropped it by my office, and he said, "Rick, I think you might want this. It's a pretty special moment." And I was privileged to be there with you. I look at that photo, and I go, there's a young kid who's just set a goal, a baby goal, and he's taken that first step, and there's an authentic smile that, there's a victory. And you look for these baby victories to find hope and to see momentum and to celebrate success when everything fills with despair. And it gives you the belief that you can do it again. Just one baby step. And yet, deep in your heart, you still don't really believe because you don't know, you can't see it. And in those days, there was no internet, and there was no way to access that knowledge. And so I was super blessed because I needed role models, people who were there before me who could actually come into my life when I needed hope most and show me the way. And one such role model came into my world, and he changed everything. And his name was Stan Strong. You see, when I was complaining and frustrated about being in the hospital for 4 months, he was injured in the 1930s, and when people with spinal cord injury wouldn't survive. And Stan, he actually was there for 4 years in that hospital. His first wife left him. There were no rehabilitation centers. As a matter of fact, there wasn't much opportunity at all. And yet, something about Stan, the very moment I met him, I looked into his eyes, and all I saw was pure joy. And there was always that smile. And after I got to know Stan, I came to realize that it wasn't about what happened to him that he couldn't change. It was about the sovereignty that he had in the space between what happened to him and how he reacted. It didn't change away his disability. It didn't change away sometimes the struggle and the pain. But he refused to be preoccupied with that, to be consumed by it. He saw hope, meaning, and purpose, and love and joy in every day. And he taught me through his example that that's something you have to willingly give up. And therefore, there can be this discipline in that space that empowers you, and you can help getting back into motion again. And Stan Strong just happened to be a peer counselor for the Canadian Paraplegic Association. And he also happened to be a volunteer for this little club wheelchair basketball team called the Vancouver Cable Cars. And it was interesting because Stan Strong was one of those selfless volunteers. You wouldn't know who he was, but he was in the background like so many thousands and thousands of Canadians, helping people achieve their hopes and dreams, encouraging them during difficult times, And the one thing that Stan did, other than mortgage his home for a fundraiser so we could have our uniforms and our equipment and go on trips, is Stan said that what you need to do is you need to pay it forward. He built a culture of responsibility. And my way of paying it forward was at least to recruit some athletes who also wanted to play. And one evening I learned about a young man who lost his leg to cancer. And this young man was struggling, and he used to play basketball, and I got his name. I called him up that night, and his name was Terry Fox. And Terry Fox was the guy who actually came out to our team, and he was still on chemotherapy at the time. And he sat in a chair, and he was weak, and he could barely push the chair, but he was inspired by so many other athletes who physically weren't as able as he was, and yet he knew that if they could do it, so could he. As a matter of fact, they were champions. I was still a relative rookie, and yet there were these unbelievable champions on our team. It was like a convergence of incredible character, dynamism, and also a culture of belonging. And belonging is something that you have an interesting paradox. It's about the mindfulness, which was referenced in our elder's prayer, of that belief and that love of self, in spite of all the things that have happened. And it's also then about the culture and the environment and the association of your peers, and of course, how society either creates or removes barriers. And the cable cars was a defining moment in my life because it just made me feel like, I was home. I was back being the person that I wanted to be, an athlete, where nowhere in the definition of an athlete did it say you needed to use your legs in order to be one. It was about heart, passion, sitting in a chair, using your arms, and being unleashed and seeing how far you could go. We had some incredible experiences as a team. I was so inspired by Terry, by Stan, and so many other athletes who are some of my best friends to this day. And Paralympic sport took me on some wonderful journeys because it also helped me have the courage to go to university, to believe I could actually graduate in physical education. And I went to UBC, and I had some great experiences, but I also learned that the attitudinal journey wasn't just inside, it was from others towards me. This one time I was late from my class, and I was blasting up a hill in my wheelchair, and I was pushing as fast as I could, and there was a young lady who was also going quite fast, and I passed her, and she saw me, and she picked up her pace, and she ran as fast as she could to catch up to me, and she was completely out of breath right at the top of the hill when she caught me, and she said, "Excuse me, can I give you a push up the hill?" And I said, "No," but I said, "You look tired, maybe you can sit on my lap, I'll give you a ride." And anyway, I gave her my card, and she saw a guy in wheelchair needs help, and I saw opportunity. Attitude and perspective. And I said, one day I'm going to do something about those attitudes. And of course, it's a renaissance when you come to a university, whether it's in Dal, whether it's at UBC, because you meet people, you have an exchange of ideas, and it's not just the academic learning, it's the cultural and social environment. And it helped propel me to believe, as I entered physical education, that if you really wanted to achieve excellence, you could believe anything's possible, but not everything, and focus is the key. And I focused in on athletics and wheelchair track, and it was unbelievable what happened. As I started to progress as a rookie, I actually came here to Halifax. I managed to make the national team, and I participated in the Pan American Wheelchair Games, and so many amazing people here in Halifax took the time to believe that they could organize a Pan Am Wheelchair Games in Canada. And little did they know that they were paving the way for this young kid from British Columbia who had wild dreams and just maybe one day might break through. And it was an incredible experience. Friends here that lasted a lifetime. Propelling me forward to the Olympic Games in Los Angeles, being part of history by the inclusion of athletes with disabilities for the first time. Or the Paralympic Games, being on the podium with two other Canadians, Mel Fitzgerald from St. John's, Newfoundland, and Andre Vigier from Sherbrooke, Quebec. And of course, I was super fortunate, because if you are on the podium at that moment, you tend to feel so grateful, because you compare your life at that moment to what it was like a decade earlier when you were lying in the ditch with your legs not working and all of your hopes and dreams gone and a blank canvas of despair. It was now being painted with colors and texture and hope and possibility, and I felt alive and real, and I truly felt like I was an athlete. But I had no illusions that it was me on my own. I was supported by so many amazing people, the role models, the champions, the fellow competitors and teammates, people like Terry Fox, my coaches, sponsors and supporters, and of course, my physiotherapist, Amanda, who treated my dislocated shoulder and helped me get back to be at that moment when doctors had written me off. Amanda, of course, became my wife, and that was the best injury I ever did have. It was amazing. It was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. But when you get to that point, you can't help but think about what you're going to do if you feel so grateful that others have put you in this position to succeed. What can you do to help others succeed as well? And what barriers do you see? I had traveled the world as a Paralympian, and I saw attitudinal and physical barriers manifested just like I had experienced in my own personal journey. And they were reflected to me by the stories of hundreds of Paralympians from any country in the world. And I didn't like it. It was demeaning. It was devastating to hear, to experience it. And I felt compelled to do what Stan would challenge me and want me to do, which is to combine my talent as a marathoner and to think of a way to make a difference, like wheeling around the world and demonstrating the potential of people with disabilities if barriers were removed. Maybe challenge people to actually think about what they could do in their local communities, maybe even create a global movement. And it was easy to talk about it, but trying to execute it was not exactly the best way to go, because we were unorganized. We left the Oak Ridge Mall and we crashed into the top of a motorhome, the box there, into the top of a tunnel, and equipment in front of the people who didn't believe it was possible. And that was the early first step. And then being able to be on the Great Wall of China to celebrate a symbolic moment that there is no barriers or walls in this world that can't be crossed. Or to experience the millions of people from Beijing to Shanghai that came out to see the possibilities that a Canadian was traveling with a disability, showing ability and trying to make a difference and shift the paradigm of words of state, embarrassment, shut in, no rights, no freedom. And Tianjin was an incredible highlight where there was this sea of humanity that I would never forget. And we were leaving a little bit of a nugget that would hopefully grow to be able to create change over the long term. Definitely not a revolution, but maybe an evolution of thought. Coming back to North America, I was buoyed by that feeling and thinking that we would be embraced all the way up the eastern seaboard of the United States before we got to Canada. But it was absolutely the opposite. It was a lot of long, lonely miles, and we weren't able to crack the message. And I felt like I was going to quit. I was going to stop at that moment. And Amanda, there she is on the road with me, and Amanda ended up talking me through that desire to quit, because she made me realize that I couldn't see the horizon just around the corner, and every day it seemed like it was filled with frustration, anger, disappointment. And so she just encouraged me to have faith, and that Providence would stick and come in, and eventually things would turn around, that maybe it was all worth it, and that Canadians would care. And she was right, and she convinced me that she was right, and I had faith in her, even if I didn't have faith in myself. And I kept going. And when I came back to Canada, people cared. In St. John's, Newfoundland, through the Atlantic provinces, coming here into Halifax, across the bridge, and moving into City Hall, and to be connected with so many amazing friends, but also new friends. To be able to meet a young man who was there on behalf of his community, just newly injured. Of course, named Kevin Murphy. And Kevin, of course, is now your speaker in your legislature, and he's an incredible talent. But he was there at that moment, like all of us when we have our injury, wondering where I'm going, what possibilities exist. And all we tried to do on the tour was offer hope. And you never know where those nuggets will land, and then you keep going across the country, feeling buoyed by the response from Nova Scotia, going across Canada in the middle of winter. But everywhere I went, I saw someone like Kevin who had been braving the cold, looking for that hope, wanting to belong, feeling perhaps that society wasn't welcoming. And yet, our Constitution had come just in 1982 of the Canada we want. Our brand new Constitution where people with disabilities were stated that that would be people of equal status, rights and privileges, full accessibility. To meet young kids who shifted their lens of hope into, if he can do that, I can go to university, I can be a teacher, I can be a business leader, a politician, I can do anything once I set my mind to it. Anything is possible. And of course, that propelled me forward because I looked and yearned for that, to reinforce the struggle and the challenge and the pain of trying to conclude that journey. And those last few days, well, they were like the dream and reality were the same. BC Place, the same mall we started where we crashed, and there we were finishing 40,000 kilometers, 34 countries, 4 continents. As was mentioned, the $26 million generated and awareness built. And I'm breaking through this finish line, celebrating the end of this journey and going, my gosh, we're done. We're finally finished. And I look behind me, I saw this sign. It says, "Welcome home, Rick." And I look above it, it says, "The end is just the beginning." What kind of a crazy marketing person put that up there? Well, they realize the tour is over. I'm done. But you think about it and you reflect and you realize that marketing person was super correct. Life is not a destination, a journey. And the tour was over, but the dream of an accessible and inclusive world for people with disabilities, oh my gosh, it was just a baby step in a massive, massive Mount Everest summit. And we weren't even at base camp. A cure for spinal cord injury? Impossible, even amongst scientists. A long way to go. And it couldn't be one man in motion going forward. It had to be many in motion. Thinking of new solutions that would accelerate progress, not just put activity out there to say that you're busy, like a global spinal cord research center, or to connect sites around the world unified by common language and common measurement so that they could collaborate and share information and accelerate and work together to get there faster. And thinking about that, here in Halifax, you have 2 amazing sites, whether it's the QE2 or the Nova Scotia Rehab Center, and you have some amazing people who are actually championing that collaboration, and that's Dr. Sean Christie and Christine Short. And I have such incredible gratitude for the role that they play and their colleagues, because they know that in order to belong, they can create that sense of community. And they can actually collaborate, and what we do locally has a global impact. And we need to think out of the box and know that we can be stronger together. And also other champions who actually exude the reality of not just finding a cure, but people like Christopher Reeve, who actually was a living example of living with a disability but showing ability as an actor, an advocate, a father, a husband. Stephen Hawking. What an amazing story. Couldn't move a muscle. And yet he is one of the most brilliant people on the planet while he lived, and yet he lived with passion and ingenuity, and he expressed his brilliance with every breath, inspired all of us to be the best we could be in spite of our challenges. Muhammad Ali, who did his best work, not in the ring, but afterwards with Parkinson's, and how he made a difference. Or Michael J. Fox. What an incredible acting talent, but an advocate, a champion for Parkinson's. And of course, finding humor and grace, diffusing sensitive issues, and helping people find the joy in the journey. Or Letitia, who is an employee at our foundation who's blind but is one of our best performing employees. Or those who want to get back out into the trade or have a chance to take advantage of interpretive services if they're deaf or hard of hearing. Or to be able to have that opportunity to think about getting not accommodation for students in the classroom, but actually teaching in the classroom, taking it to the next level. And of course, when you think about it, the movement has continued not just in that realm, but it's continued in athletics, in the outdoors, in transportation. And we see that there's been such progress that we don't see disability as much anymore. And that's why when Canada achieved the distinction of hosting the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2010, we sent our mayor, our big city mayor from Vancouver, to receive the Olympic flag at the end of the Torino Games to symbolize it was our turn. He happened to be a quadriplegic, and he adapted that electric chair and he accepted the flag. His name was Sam Sullivan. And he did that pirouette like any big city mayor would. And it was unbelievable to see. He did it exactly like anyone would, maybe even better. And we didn't have to say one thing about our values and the progress we'd been making. And we weren't just hosting the Olympic Games. We were hosting the Olympic and Paralympic Games. 2 events inside one games, one class of people. No distinction, no blurring the lines. In reality, it was with one group of athletes, one group of volunteers and organizers. And Sam was symbolic. And that's why I was super privileged to be able to actually take the Olympic flame into the stadium to help launch and start the games, to kick it off, to welcome 3.4 billion people around the world to our games, an accessible and inclusive games, where our Canadian dream was unfolding. 25 years later, thinking about progress, it's hard to measure progress in massive social change year in and year out. But 25 years later, I went back to certain places to be able to see that on the Great Wall of China, they actually had a ramp and a lift to get onto the wall. In China, human rights had been actually adopted for people with disabilities, and they were interested in collaborating and working as a global community. The UN and former Chairman Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General, was implementing the Convention on Rights and Freedoms for People with Disabilities. And youth across our country were demonstrating the ability to be socially responsible and making a difference like never before, building communities of the Canada we want, one baby step at a time. In our cross-country relay, we were recognizing the difference makers that were forging change, like your own Kevin Lamarck, who was a part of many journeys for me as a part of our Rick Hansen Institute, a board member or an ambassador, or Linda Lozelle and Chuck Bridges, who were there to help organize the Pan Am Games, my Man in Motion Tour, and many other journeys, or Ross Sampson, who was there as my wheelchair Paralympic comrade in arms, an ambassador, a supporter of our tour, and someone who's been advocating for change all his life, but also someone who's a brilliant engineer and an incredible employee. And so the people who have been part of that journey, they're absolutely phenomenal. People who have actually encouraged me, supported me along the way. We are in motion together. We feel like we belong because we're starting to realize that we have a choice and we have a say. And I've had the opportunity to work with so many people, and I've seen progress, and I feel optimistic about the world. It's smaller, it's more connected than ever before. I also know that things are changing, that there's over 1 billion people on the planet today living with a disability, according to the World Health Organization. And that with aging baby boomers in Canada, we'll move to 1 in 5 Canadians with a disability by 2036. And disability will affect everyone. And that's why I'm super excited about what's happening in Nova Scotia to help foster a sense of belonging, that you and the government of Nova Scotia have implemented an Accessibility Act and legislation that is going to embed the scaffolding of the translation of our Constitution into rights in provincial and hopefully into municipal and Indigenous communities. And, of course, Kevin Murphy has been working with his colleagues and others to be able to help implement that. And who would have imagined back on that Man in Motion tour, Kevin would be leading the charge and driving such amazing progress with his colleagues. Whether it be Mike Savage, the mayor, whether it be someone like Jerry Post, who's the champion of the Accessibility Directorate that's helping to implement that legislation and turning it into reality one good turn at a time. Or Carla Quattro, the federal minister responsible to implement Canadian legislation that's been tabled this year. Progress. But you know, we aren't just dealing with this issue as a charity or just as a human right issue. This is also an economic and cultural imperative. And our community has been fragmented. We've been oriented towards body part, clinical diagnosis, or disease orientation, or service need, or medical need. And ultimately, we haven't come together on the big things where we can all relate, the barriers, the lack of awareness, perhaps the negative attitudes, or the lack of accessibility. But as our community comes together, we hit at or above our weight, and rising tides float all boats, and we make transformational breakthrough, not just locally, nationally, we do it globally. And I think it's really important to be able to forge solutions that standardize language in accessibility and standardize measurement. And that's why we've decided to take a page out of the LEED's energy efficient building environment, tackle the built environment barrier for accessibility, create a professional accredited program with a group of access and inclusion specialists, train and educate and accredit people so it's not just the advocacy community, it's architects, engineers, city planners, developers, real estate portfolio folks, and that they get it right the first time together, and there's less advocacy requirements and less human rights challenges and less complaints and compliance requirements. Why? Because we get to our global standard, which is a minimum, and we go beyond it with innovation, and we certify where people are, and they can speak to their employees or their customers, and they can be accessibility certified or accessibility certified gold. And this can exist not just here in Halifax and in Nova Scotia or across the country, but anywhere in the world. We already have over 300 buildings that have been rated in British Columbia, 307 different organizations, and it's been fantastic to see the progress. We've had 1,100 sites registered and in the queue, and it's accelerating. And Nova Scotia has adopted this with Nova Scotia Community College, training 24 experts, utilizing a grant from the government of Nova Scotia to help them rate buildings all throughout this province and find out who is at that standard and who's beyond it and who's not, and what recommendations to get there. Trying to get incentives so that people aren't bearing the burden on their own, because I think most people want to change. They just want to know how, and they want to also have the capacity to. And that's really quite exciting because we can see this becoming that global standard. And I'd like to say thank you to the Nova Scotia Community College for their incredible support. I'd also like to say thank you for all the folks here at Dalhousie, because there's a great research project taking place by Miko, and Miko is actually doing an outcome measure so that the metrics of that work will be translatable to how it's making a difference and how we can measure what's happening in Halifax or at Dalhousie or in Nova Scotia to other universities or other provinces or Canada to other countries. And they say if you can't measure it, well, then there's no sense stating that you have a goal. And we can liberate the potential of people with disabilities and normalize that whole issue and just seeing it being seamless. Doesn't matter where you are, whether it be in public places, whether it's having a chance to go and shop, or whether it's to go to a normal gym, not a special gym. Or if you're blind, you can be the first person into work, turn on the lights for your colleagues, and be a top performer at the same time. Or you can actually get up up the ramp into a restaurant for your first date. Or if you're an artist, you can free your ability even though you can't move your legs or your arms. Or if you're a kid, you can be in the playground just like anyone else and feel like anything's possible and you belong. I love this photo of Emily with her able-bodied friends and how she belongs in this inclusive environment. And then I think about it and I realize, of course, that she's not the only one with a disability in that photo. Someone has a visual limitation. Someone has a hearing limitation. Someone has arthritis. Someone is dealing with cancer. Someone is dealing with depression and anxiety. Someone with mental illness. Some disabilities you can't see, but are equally or even more devastating. And that sense of belonging is creating a culture where it's normal that, as Michael J. Fox would say, we all have our bag of hammers, and what really counts, though, is that we honor each other. We respect every human being. We create that sense of being honored and to honor ourselves. I get a chance to be able to travel the world and speak to young people everywhere. And one of the great things about that is there's a question and inquiry at the end, and there's one question that comes up all the time, which is, Mr. Hansen, if you had a choice to go back to that road when you were hitchhiking, would you decide to get in the back of the pickup truck or not? And the answer is, back then, yeah, I would have never gotten in the back of that pickup truck. I would have sold my soul for the use of my legs. I wanted it all back. But you're asking me the question now, and my answer to you is, I would get right back in. I would never trade my life for the use of my legs. As hard as it was, the lessons of Stand Strong and so many mentors made me ask tough questions, made me reflect on the meaning of life, made me understand that you can suffer, struggle, and still see love, beauty, respect, and a sense of meaning and purpose in every day. And it makes life feel that it's worth living. More importantly, it makes life want it to be lived. And it makes you feel like you cherish every moment and you feel so grateful and that you belong to your family, to your community, to the world, and that your life is precious and that you hope that you can stretch it every day. And I am so blessed. I feel that with my family that I am one of the luckiest humans on this planet. And my little grandson, little Everett, he fills me with love, pure love, and hope for him. Hope for him because I have an extreme hope that he will live in a better world and that he will feel a sense of responsibility and he will feel that he belongs and that he has that sovereignty inside of him. And ultimately, hopefully, if we have succeeded in removing barriers for people with disabilities, we will have been able to demonstrate how belonging is possible, to enable people to still feel whole as human beings in spite of their challenges, but to break down barriers in society so that they truly feel that they are included. Canada is a country of great strength and diversity, but we need to build bridges to inclusivity. And disability knows no boundary. It happens to people of color, indigenous communities, men and women, different religions, and ultimately different classes in social economic status. And so if we can work together to remove these barriers, we can build bridges to inclusivity in every barrier, and that anything is possible. And in conclusion, this honorary degree and this opportunity to speak to you at this long forum and to wrap up your series and help celebrate the 200th anniversary of Dalhousie is an immense honor. It inspires me. It's not a recognition of my accomplishments, but it is a reflection of the gratitude and the love I have for my country and for the people who have touched my life along the way and given the most precious gift they have, their time, their love, and their best effort to make a difference. And I hope that you leave this moment thinking about who you can be grateful to and for, to feel that you are not alone, and that you too are making a difference, and that you have hopes and dreams, and your challenges, whether they're visible or invisible, can be overcome, and that dreams do come true. Never, ever give up on your dreams. Thank you so much. Such an honor. Thank you. Thank you. A privilege. Let's keep going. Keep going. Thank you.
So good.
And you.
I'm Colleen Jones from CBC. I feel like Madonna with this microphone. I don't know about you. And when Ivan Joseph, the MC, talked about when we were watching the St. Elmo fire, I was back in there crying, and now I was crying again. I feel like it's Tuesday night and we're watching This Is Us. You know, it's my weekly. I first met Rick in 1982. We were a lot younger, but not a lot. You know, we were 12. And he was here for the Pan Am Games. And you had won how many medals?
9.
9. And I knew then, I said, he is the most positive, motivational person. And you talk about how Stan and your wife Amanda, who we all need in our life, by the way, you have changed and influenced so many people, and including me back then when I was 12. Okay, so I wasn't 12. I wasn't 12. This is the Q&A portion of the evening now. We have microphones here and there, and somebody also is able to have a drink, Rick.
Thank you.
It's not wine. 1982, though, and I asked you, I said, was that pre-Man in Motion or post? And it was pre, but those were early years in all of this, weren't it, the Pan Am Games in Halifax?
They were, and it was a breakthrough period, and super special, and I'll always have Halifax in my heart, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life being here.
I can't think of a better final speaker for the belong form than you, because the whole message was about breaking barriers and belonging, and that's such a powerful message that we all need to be reminded about all the time. So nice to have you back in Halifax, by the way.
Great to
Truly
be here.
wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And everybody's so dark out there, isn't it? But if anybody has a question, the microphone's there, and we only have about apparently 20 minutes, although I know we could stay a lot longer. But if anybody has a question, the microphones are around. And your children, your grandfather now.
I am,
That's
yeah.
amazing. And
Yeah.
what I could compare notes because I have my little grandson
Yes.
too. But what has been, I remember talking to you at the WE event last year about how you stay so positive.
Right.
And because we all sort of stumble sometimes. So you were talking to me about meditation and the role that that's played in your life, but how do you stay so amazingly positive? I guess because all of us are counting on you, so you have to do it for that. But
No, it's, I mean, actually, before I left on my tour, I was getting so superheated, trying to organize everything, the expectations, the pressure. I wasn't sleeping, I was getting agitated, and I realized if something didn't happen, I would just literally implode. And a friend of mine told me that he used a meditation technique, and that I should learn to meditate because he thought I was getting like just too stressed and busy, and I wasn't settling. And so I introduced a technique to use 2 20-minute periods during the day to settle and get my mind settled, and it gave me perspective, and it recharged my energy, and ultimately got me really more grounded and connected, and so it was easier then to find the gratitude and the joy, and get reconnected with your motivation.
gratitude and joy.
Yeah.
Now, do we have a question over by that microphone? Okay.
This gentleman was before me.
We can't see this half of the field, so go ahead to the invisible Oh,
Hello,
there we
Colleen.
go. That's better. That's nicer.
Hello, Colleen. Over here.
Oh, yes.
David Hensby. I first met Rick back in August 1982 as a student president of St. Mary's. I happened to be working security guard that weekend of the wheelchair games, and I opened the door for the Goresbrook Lounge to let this gentleman in. And he flirted with every girl that night. But now I'm at Halifax Regional Council, and at Halifax, we're looking at redeveloping the Cogswell Interchange, and we're also striving for the Rick Hansen Foundation Gold Standard. Could you tell the audience what do you anticipate a redevelopment of 35 acres in downtown Halifax could be for our community?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate City Council to make that kind of a statement that this brand new redevelopment is going to become a gold level standard of accessibility and inclusion. So what that means is the commitment is that right at the beginning is that every person that will be involved in that project will, at the right levels in the design culture, will have to be carrying an accessibility accredited ticket on how to actually apply the principles of universal and inclusive design. And that their knowledge in that same measurement framework and that same language will be placed on the drawings and through the engineers and through city planners, and ultimately the end product won't be what typically happens. The end product is usually driven by reactive advisory advocacy issues, or whether someone happens to use a standard or not. It'll be actually built right, and it'll be more efficient, effective, and functional. And ultimately, it will be a celebration and a model for others all around the world that can actually follow that same standard and process. And so it'll be a shared responsibility. And that's, I think, what we need to do is take the energy of those people with disabilities who see the barriers or have the solutions, and take that across the board in a unified and agreed upon curriculum. And so I think it's going to be a phenomenal outcome, and I'm super happy about that.
We're all excited to see how that turns out, too.
And thanks for letting me in the doors that night.
And he might have been looking at the girls, but I think the girls were looking at his guns, so it went both ways. All right, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Hansen. You spoke about how proud you were to be a Canadian.
Yeah.
Can you give us some sense where we are in the world in terms of our legislation? And, you know, clearly what you've been doing is very important. And you noted how important it was, I think, that it was in our Constitution, the 1982 version.
Right.
So where are we in the world relative to the values that are driving the legislation that you're advocating and is making it a better place for all Canadians?
Well, it's a great question. And I can give you some subjective sort of statements like, I think we're doing okay. But here's the reality is, and this is what helps drive the work that we're doing with Dalhousie on outcome measures, is we have no way right now, because the world is so fragmented, we use such different lenses, and most countries don't even have a commitment to metrics that are standardized that they can share. And so it's almost impossible to compare Canada to any other country in the world, except by more subjective statements. Well, do they have a constitution? Canada has a constitution, and it's probably one of the most progressive constitutions in the inclusion of people with disabilities and their rights than anywhere in the world. But do they execute it? And where are the gaps? There's legislation in some provinces, 3 of our provinces, but federal legislation hasn't even been adopted. There's human rights laws, and when people have problems, they can actually complain to the Human Rights Tribunal and have their case heard. But it's one person, one issue at a time. And by the way, over 50% of the human rights lawsuits in Canada are driven by people with disabilities and their grievances of lack of compliance and feeling of isolation and frustration. And that approach is just not the right way. It's a safety net, but it's not the right way to address the problems. And so Canada has to up its game and also participate in metrics that can be globally relevant and portable, so we can actually start to really address how is Halifax doing, how is Dalhousie doing, how is Nova Scotia and the country doing, and we can get there. And I think this certification program and our rating system is one measurement, and hopefully we can inspire other kinds of measurements and other barriers like employment or in transportation or in communications, and ultimately we can actually then start to really measure where we're at. One thing I do know is we also measure Canadian attitudes through an Angus Reid poll, And 92% of Canadians believe that accessibility is a human right. And that's a huge statement of support to our Constitution and our legislation. So now, let's make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, there is the old saying, if it's important, measure it and it'll get done. What other country or what other government are you looking at that is currently exercising that measurement responsibility, and who's doing it well?
You know, the United Nations is actually crying for countries to step up with metrics and actually demonstrate and identify and offer metrics that they can utilize, not just for their Convention on Rights and Freedom of People with Disabilities, but they've gone beyond that to implement sustainability goals. They've actually included accessibility as vital to economic and cultural sustainability goals. And that's a big step forward. And I think that's what you're seeing in most societies, especially here in Canada, is the tip of the wedge of the iceberg of aging baby boomers and the exploding number of people with disabling conditions. And no longer is it just a charitable issue or a human rights imperative, it's an economic and cultural imperative, and economies will depend on it. And often people forget that if you take the time to do research and measure, people often think about the cost of accommodation as being too prohibitive. And that's a fallacy, because it's the cost, the unsustainable cost of sustaining the existing confining policies where there's such massive unemployment. There's undereducated people, uncontributing folks who are not part of it, and ultimately the costs of retrofitting and dealing with the intrinsic barriers that are put in place by the system that's broken is a massive tax on Canadians. Our economic and cultural fitness is being severely handicapped. So the cost of transforming Canada to an accessible country is a rounding error compared to what we're sustaining currently year in and year out. But what we miss is the economic outcomes on the outside, on the payoff, and the cultural outcomes. So Conference Board of Canada has said that, first of all, there's over 500,000 Canadians that are able to come back to work or to enter employment, ready, willing, and able by 2030 if we're accessible and accommodating. There's also an increase in consumer spending, about $300 billion of consumer spending. Also, $17 billion to GDP performance, and $4 billion of economic revenue to government coffers. And of course, why wouldn't we take advantage of that opportunity? Not to mention products and services from innovation in supporting people with disabilities to liberate their abilities and function. What can be built here in Dalhousie through research and innovation can actually be a globally sustainable business and drive this economy, not just of the region, but the country. So we shift our lens and view of disability as a burden or a cost to an opportunity, an absolute imperative to be able to be a productive country that is truly maximizing the best of its talent.
I'm from Dow Business School. I'm going to make sure every student hear what you just said. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.
Sorry. Colleen and Rick, Brian Ledbetter from Dalhousie. Just wanted to mention that I know we have some other questions from the floor from those who may not have been able to access the microphone. So I know we have a question over here to our left. And we have a wireless mic for anyone else who would like to ask a question.
Excellent.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Over there?
Hi, down here.
Okay, but right now we're right over here.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Welcome to Halifax, by the way. I'm sure you're aware of the increasing emphasis on university campuses and in the public sector on diversity and inclusion agendas. We have one such diversity agenda here at Dal. I want to ask you a question, but before I do so, I'd like to preface this by giving a few examples of where persons with disabilities fit into the diversity framework at Dalhousie. About a decade ago, Dalhousie eliminated the position of advisor to students with disabilities. Students with disabilities now go to Access Services, which provides services to any student seeking accommodation with or without a disability. When I go to Access Services, I see no staff member there who either looks like me or who can relate to my lived experience. When I go to the Human Rights and Equity Office, I see no staff member there who looks like me or who can relate to my lived experience. When students using wheelchairs want to get a ride home on the Tiger Patrol, a van service available in the evenings, they cannot do so because it's not accessible. Despite many complaints over the years, nothing has changed. During Respect Week on campus, persons with disabilities are ignored and they get no mention at all. To qualify, turning to the student union, to qualify for the accessibility bursary on campus, students with disabilities must first prove that they are registered with Access Services. However, many students with disabilities do not register with Access Services for personal reasons. The Accessibility Committee with the Dalhousie Student Union is dominated by persons who do not have disabilities. However, they are making decisions on who is eligible for the accessibility bursary. Other examples, there's one other thing. Any student on the Dalhousie campus is able to vote for the accessibility rep on the student council, whether they have a disability or not. Other examples exist, but to return to my original point, I would like to ask you whether you have observed the same tendencies that I have observed, insofar as persons with disabilities are being gradually marginalized, erased out of diversity agendas, and excluded from such agendas.
Thank you for that question, and also thank you for your reflection of the barriers that you face. Because first of all, I honor those barriers that you face, and I hear that not just from you, but I hear it all across this country and around the world. And it obviously frustrates me, but it also motivates me and makes me realize that we've got a long way to go. And I think I mentioned that in my presentation. There are real barriers that we still have to tackle, and I believe that Dalhousie is not alone. Most institutions that you would encounter have to up their game, and I was really thrilled that the president was talking about moving to the next level, and I'm sure they're listening to the reflections of the real barriers, because if those real barriers aren't identified, and then ultimately it's the solutions to how to actually deal with those barriers, and that's the art of this, and ultimately it's about leadership and collaboration. And what I love about what I think I hear in your spirit as well is that you're not just identifying the problems, because you're actually here in this campus and you're being taught how to creatively problem solve and be part of it and be ready, willing, and able to enable the administration to respond. And I guess lastly, the answer to your question, I see principles like bringing big systems like inclusion or diversity. People with disabilities actually get often lost in that equation. There's no question. And one of the reasons, and I mentioned this in my presentation, but I'll say it again, is often it's because disability is so diverse, and we don't often see it as one easily identifiable group. And therefore, if it's so fragmented, it's hard to really anchor on the weight of how powerful and important it is. And I think it's really important for our community to reflect and to understand and to come together to really show the weight of this community, that disability is a major, big deal in this country, and it should never be left off of a diversity or an inclusion agenda. It should be its own identity. And of course, there's 1,000 individual needs, but the big art of systemic change is trying to create solutions that meet the greatest needs as much as possible and try to get as much traction, because by doing that, it'll cast a wake forward so those outlying barriers can be more easily addressed. And so, to your point, courage to you for bringing forward those issues and challenges, and encouragement for you to be a leader and be part of the solution. Absolutely. Yeah. And I can honestly say, I remember when I was at the University of British Columbia, and there were no student service advocates, and there were 0 ramps. There was stairs everywhere, and it was a super foreign world, and it was really tough to feel like that you belonged. And so I understand what it's like when you're a student and you're engaged and you just want to, be there like anyone else. And so let's work together. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that would love to work with the university campus and administration to make that difference.
Yeah.
So keep going. Thank you. Many in motion, right? Many in motion.
And we are quickly running out of time, but was there a question over here? Did somebody say that? Yes, over here. Yeah.
Yeah, over here. Hi, Dr. Hansen. Just wanted to get your thoughts on when a city wants to be made more accessible, but it's seen more as a financial issue than a human rights issue.
Right. Yeah. No. It's. I think it's really fundamental that we really realize that the statement and the words in our Constitution and our legislation, they're not just words, right? It's a commitment, and that means that's the price of being Canadian, and we have to take care of business. We have to actually make that happen, and we've got to stop getting preoccupied with, again, as I said earlier, the costs of actually accommodating and making things accessible. We have to weigh that with the human rights statement, and we also have to recognize, even if you're an economist, it's still the right thing to do, because if you want to be fiscally responsible, get it done and liberate ability, drive economies. And so bottom line is that people have to be able to deal with it. And it's a shared responsibility. And that's the problem with our country, in a challenge of addressing something like that, is there's multiple levels of jurisdiction, and getting those levels of jurisdiction harmonized so that we're not fragmenting jurisdiction. They're getting leaders to collaborate on common standards and objectives, getting infrastructure dollars in play from the federal government to assist provincial and municipal governments, and getting private sector involved to be able to drive that as well. And lastly is to incent philanthropy to also come to the table to get there faster. If we all share a sense of responsibility, that human right objective, we can get there, and ultimately we can get there super fast. And so there's a sense of urgency. And with aging boomers coming down the path, it's going to have a massive impact on our country if we don't. And so keep banging the human rights agenda and the compliance and the enforcement, but let's create creative solutions to get over the line faster, so the energy is spent on maybe innovation and going to the next level.
Thank you.
Hi, Rick. My name is Hannah Wood. I met you in 2016 at the Youth Council on Disability in Ottawa at Carleton University, and it was fabulous to get to hear you speak there. I'm an accessibility professional here in Halifax, working out of my own firm, and I've taken the Rick Hansen certification course, which was amazing to have brought here. I was actually the first class here on the whole East Coast to do it, so it was really an honor and really learned a lot. And I just wanted to ask you, how can we, and I think this plays off the last two comments, how can we keep persons with disabilities involved in the process of making these changes here in the province? Yeah. Because we don't want to create a paternalistic environment between what people need and who's prescribing that to them. So how can we keep that involvement?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's critical that every person is, if you want to even go back to the concept of belonging, how do you know when you've arrived? You ask someone. and at the end of the day, that's a personal experience. And if people are still experiencing barriers, there's the first point. It gives us the reflection of where the problems may be and we can work together to try to solve those problems. And it's not about the disability, it's about the barrier, and the disability becomes a bit more normalized. And then at the end of the day, people with disabilities aren't just good at coming up with problems, they're good at creating solutions. And so mobilizing the community and ultimately creating advocacy groups, creating a translation from advocacy into action groups, and as I said earlier, is if people with disabilities can also then cross the barrier to become not just advocates, but professional and accredited solution providers, then that adds even more potency. And so I think that's a powerful force. And then lastly, as ambassadors, they can actually speak out and tell their story and create awareness, because awareness and attitudes still have to be transformed. And we're humans who are hardwired on narrative, and we all have a story, and every story is valid and has worth. And if we can shine a light on a story, we can cross bridges and we can build connections, and somehow someone will think out of the box and probably respond to that when they hear that there's still a barrier.
Yeah, half of the class for the first heat of the certification were persons with disabilities, and that was a mandate of it.
Yeah.
So we have NSCC and the Accessibility Directorate to thank for handling that from beginning to end. So I think that work, that groundwork is there, but just wanted to know your thoughts on continuing it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and congratulations on being in that first class, and Nova Scotia is creating history, so,
nice.
super excited. And I hope we get to a point where we can start to accredit, not just in the built environment, but towards employment or customer service or communications or technology, and start to really push out the shared knowledge and responsibility.
That big countdown clock that we're supposed to follow, we're over, but we have a question over there, so let's squeeze in one more.
I'd be honest, yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Hansen. My name's Ian Sifton. I grew up in Steveston, BC, and I remember when I was 12 years old, my school and I, we went up to Thermal Drive to walk alongside you for the 25th anniversary. And I remember just being a young kid back then, about maybe we're halfway up, like feeling, oh my God, like I'm so tired, and wondering like how much more of the hill is left up there. And then looking over and seeing you just still pushing way through it. And I was wondering, during your tour, world tour all those years ago, what would you say is the most challenging part of it, whether physically or mentally, and what helped you overcome that?
Great question. When I was on the tour, there were a few points along the way. I think I referenced one where I truly thought I was at the end of my rope and was going to quit. And probably the hardest period of the entire tour was in that 6-month period in Europe. We were 3 months into the journey, and then obviously between 3 and 9 months by the time we translated through Europe. It was we went through 16, I think it was 16 countries in 6 months. And we were getting into the end of fall and into winter, and it was cold and rainy, and we were just unorganized, and just it seemed like we'd just start to get some momentum in a country, and we were now in a new country and new language, and communication was tough, and our crew was burnt out. My coach and good friend had decided to leave because he just was exhausted, and he knew that he couldn't go any further. We were challenged on the financial side back home. They kept telling us that we might have to close the whole tour down because we didn't have enough money, and I was starting to get injured and dealing with illness. I think I caught a flu and a bug in the food, and just everything was going wrong. It was just literally an immense struggle every single stroke, every single day. And I think the only way I was able to get through is lean on my team. They just did some unbelievable things to be there for me when I was, trying to just get in the game and just keep going. They were unbelievable. And then I was able to see the odd little example of something good happening in each day. It was always there somewhere, but sometimes when everything's going wrong, you just get consumed by it, and it skews your perspective. And I'll never forget this one time going into a small community in Poland, and the whole community was out, and I could not believe it, and it came through the network of a wheelchair sport organization, through the Paralympic movement. And as I came in to the community, there was a young man who was on a piece of plywood with a pillow on it, and he had these 4 little skateboard wheels. and he didn't have a wheelchair. He was pushing himself with his gloves along the floor or the road, and he was streaming tears of joy, and through his interpreter, he said, thank you, Mr. Hansen, thank you for what you're doing. And then he went on to say, thank you, because for the first time in my life, my family and my community are looking at me with ability. I feel I belong. And that experience, that one moment, it took away so much of that stuff. Gave me fuel to just keep going. Next stroke, next day, and every little point along the way there was something, either with my team, a little threshold, a milestone, and I guess it helped reinforce almost like a ritual of gratitude and seeking it to try to counteract the balance of the shitty stuff that was going on. And there was a lot of crappy things, and it was just a fine wire. Truly a fine wire.
Yeah, there I go crying again, and I wore mascara tonight and everything, right? Third time tonight. No more.
Thank you very much.
We're over our time. I know we could spend all night here, and you have been such a delight, as always. You're the most motivating person on the planet, and we can all learn a little bit more from you every time that you speak to try to be a little bit better, to be more compassionate, and to find a way to break down barriers. It's a message we all need to hear all the time.
Thanks,
so thank
Colleen.
you so much.
Vice
We're going to
versa.
ask Meredith, Dr. Hansen, by the way, fabulous. And we're going to have Meredith Bullock is coming out to the stage.
Hi, Meredith. Pleasure meeting you. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Colleen. My name is Meredith Bullock, and I am in my first year at King's College doing the foundation year program.
Awesome.
I also wrote for Dalhousie's varsity team, and I am a proud Terry Fox scholar.
Awesome. Fantastic. That's awesome.
I am thrilled to be here tonight to thank you, Dr. Hansen. You have given us so much to reflect on and consider. On behalf of Dalhousie University, it is our pleasure to present you with this gift. It is a blanket that has been made from the wool of the sheep at our Dalhousie Faculty of Agriculture, located in Truro, Nova Scotia.
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Meredith. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was beautiful. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Dalhousie's 200th celebration is filled with events and activities across our campuses. To learn more about upcoming events, visit dal200.ca. Everyone is now invited to a reception to be held just outside the Machinist room. Rick will be available for the next hour in the reception area, during which time you are more than welcome to take photos and request autographs.
Awesome.
Rick will also have copies of his new book, Rick Hansen's Man in Motion World Tour, 30 years later, a celebration of courage, strength, and power in the community for sale, with all proceeds going back to the work of the foundation. Rick Hansen's books will be available for purchase following the presentation at a special rate of $20, and cash, credit, check, and debit are all acceptable methods of payment. Finally, please join me again in thanking Dr. Rick Hansen. Dalhousie, honored to be here.
Awesome. Very proud of you. Super great. Keep it up. Fantastic. I'm honored. Thank you. Awesome.
Well done.
Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you at the reception.
Thank you. Such an honor. We'll see you out there.